All right. So good morning to the one who just arrived. I just started the recording. I'm gonna send the link to the recording and the slides probably somewhere next week. So you don't need to take notes if you don't need it. And let's dive in. So more and more growers are interested in growing all year round, and there's many reasons for that. So people want to get most out of their investment, want to balance their workload over the year, keep their customer, keep trained labor. So many reasons, but we realized that unfortunately there's not that much information about if you want to start up growing in the winter. It's still very challenging. So since we got asked a lot of questions, we thought we might as well throw in what we learned about greenhouse, about growing in greenhouses in the winter. I'm going to talk more about the climate and how to save energy today. And I'm going to admit everyone that comes in as well at the same time. All right, so it's relatively a new field. People have been growing in the winter for a long time, but there's still very little information. So we still have more question and answer, but I'm going to try today to just bring numbers to give ideas of like orders of magnitude and get ideas that I've seen and that I wanted to share with you, because I think sharing information is how we progress in general. All right, so for those who don't know me, I think there's a lot today. My name is Guillaume. Weird French name. I started Orisha 6 years ago with my friend Pierre, and our goal is to help market gardeners help market gardeners feed people sustainably, basically. My partner Pierre was a farmer at the time, and he was looking for a way to simplify his farm and to save time. I think time is an issue for a lot of farmers, we discovered since then. So I was trained as a software engineer, so I thought about automation in the beginning. So we started designing a system to help market gardeners specifically. And I didn't know much at the time about farming, but I was really learning, as you might see on the field. And here, I swear I was not waiting for the rain. I was just trying to read out the ridge vent motor specs. And I had to learn a lot about the technical stuff, but fortunately, I also got very lucky and got to talk with a lot of farmers, a lot of experienced growers in greenhouses, physicists, engineers, scientists. Like there's a lot of very passionate people around the small farm community here and elsewhere, and I'm tipping my hat to them for their generosity with all the knowledge. And also, I'm based in Quebec, so it's a really fertile ground for expertise and ideas for small-scale farming. Many of you, I think, know JM, the market gardener. So there's a lot of the farm landscape that's built around his ideas. And also the government here is investing a lot in small farms and greenhouse in general. So we've seen a lot of new ideas come up, and hopefully I will manage to bring some ideas that might be interesting to you too. So still learning every day from people, and I don't have that much firsthand farmers experience, more secondhand experience from a lot of people. And I ended up developing an uncommon expertise around growing vegetables in market gardener kind of greenhouse. So my objective today is really to share ideas, what I've seen, what I've heard, things that we worked on here at Orisha around winter growing. And I'm going to talk about principles, but I'm going to try to bring it to make it as concrete as possible so that you can all take away ideas for your own projects. The presentation in the beginning was like 5 hours of material, so I tried to cut. Hopefully, I managed to reach the good amount of details, so to make it interesting for all of you. And by the way, the guy in the picture here in orange is Ben Hartman. Is a very generous guy that really impressed me with a lot of his efficiency ideas. And his goal is always to keep the workload on the farm below 35 hours a week. And I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in too. And he just offered to do a webinar. I think it's on March 21st. So I'm just putting that here if you're interested. It's about the lean startup lean that he adapted to the lean farm. So really recommending it if you're interested. All right, so I don't know. I think we have a lot of Americans here today, like David in Connecticut. Yeah. So I just want to talk about units because I know, well, it's a bit weird. We don't have the same dollar. We don't have the same units in general. And I'm a Canadian, so I'm going to stick to Canadian prices. But from what I realized when I was comparing with American prices, it's often similar, even though the exchange rate is quite different. Like the prices are similar, so at least it gives another magnitude. And for other element, I'm going to talk with the units I'm used to, so I'm not gonna have it not gonna be too confused about it, but I try to wrote the other like imperial units on the slides. And most of like the whole presentation, when I'm talking about greenhouses, about the 30 by 100 feet greenhouse, which seems to be kind of the most standard size of greenhouse. Okay, so is winter growing profitable? Question that I heard a lot. And unfortunately, the answer is it depends. There's many ways of doing it. There's, well, depends on what you do, of course, like in farming in general. But it depends a lot on energy. What I've seen the most is people using propane. So I'm going to talk about propane throughout the presentation. But that's going to be the big topic of today, how we manage energy in a way where we can make things profitable and enjoyable as much as possible for people. So in general, like the most promising model that people have seemed to be converging to is what I would call a minimalist production or minimally heated greenhouses, and people grow cold hardy leafy greens in them. And why I'm saying minimalist is that because the diminishing return comes quite fast. We're not looking for the optimal growth condition, but we're more looking for the optimal economical conditions. And to give an idea, the potential income that so far we're seeing is about 1/4 of what you can get with tomatoes. So expenses has to follow too. So what I'm going to talk about in the next hour is mostly how we can pay less in propane, put more money into our pockets. And that's, I split that in three topics, the second one being the one I'm going to talk about the most. The first one is for people who are planning to install a new greenhouse or just concept in general that might help you. The second one is going to be about energy and the climate we want to have in the greenhouse. And the third one is going to be really short, but about how to maximize impact for every dollar of energy you're spending. Right, so what's the best spot for your greenhouse, best location? A rule of thumb is that about 1%, well, 1% of light yield give us 1% in yield. So every little bit of energy you add to your production, it's going to add to your yields as well. So to give an idea of the stakes here, like the cloudiest winter day will yield about 3%, only 3% of the sunniest summer day. So there's very, very little light in the winter when it's cloudy compared to the best the best sunniest day in summer. And that has two consequences. The first one is there's very little growth that happens in the winter, and the second one is we don't have as much energy for heating the greenhouse in the summer. Even if we don't need it in the summer, that's when it is, unfortunately. And I use small furnace icons as my unit of energy. So it's a furnace of 200,000 BTU. And you can say it's about 5 times more in the summer than in the winter. So we have to be very clever about light because that's how we get free energy and that's how we get growth and yields in the end. And how do you use that principle? Well, first thing is the orientation of your greenhouse. So if you have, if you're planning to install a greenhouse, like the orientation is quite important. I was talking to a greenhouse consultant here in Quebec, and this winter they measured in a greenhouse that was oriented north-south versus one at east-west, and they saw that there were 50% more energy coming, well, 50% more sunlight in the greenhouse that was oriented east-west. So that's a lot of energy that you want to take advantage of. So if your greenhouse is not already set up, that's the thing you want to consider. Second thing is the shadows, because the sun is not as high in the sky in the winter than in the summer. You probably know that, but the thing sometimes we don't think about is when you install a greenhouse in the summer, you're thinking, okay, I'm probably far enough from that tree that won't cast shadow over the greenhouse. But I heard stories of people messing that up. So maybe just thinking in the winter, they like put flags or something to know really where the shadow is stopping, not get surprises. And the last point that you should think about when you install a new greenhouse is the wind. And why is that? Is because the greenhouse suffer the same wind chill effect than we do. And to give an idea, like only, I put that in mile per hour, only 10 miles per hour is about 30% more heat loss. So 40% more on the energy bill. So if you can consider where's the dominant wind coming from, and can you have a natural windbreaker or an artificial one that you want to build, that can be an interesting point to consider. But once again, careful to the shadows. So that was my small section on where to put your greenhouse. Now, how to heat without burning all the profit. In Quebec here, there's been a study about different ways of producing in the winter. They compared two different approaches. So the row cover approach is quite popular, and the minimally heated greenhouse. And they ended up with the conclusion that they both end up with the same profit at the end of the year. So they're basically exchanging heat cost for labor cost. And when the heat, they had more yield. So in the end, it kind of balanced it out. So both options seems to be viable, but I really prefer the heated one, and I'm going to try to explain to you why here. So first thing with the row covers, unfortunately, it blocks the light because we're not always there right on time to remove the covers, and it can take a lot of energy. And when it's cold in the morning, it's not as tempting to go out. So in the end, we're basically going to lose light, pretty sure. And another point that is important to consider is in that study I was mentioning, they had to use 4 layers of row covers to replace heating. So it depends, of course, where you are. If you're more in the south and it's warmer in your area, then you're probably going to need less. But it's a lot of labor, and often I saw farmers that were just leaving them there to avoid that. So less light. Then with the covers, there's more humidity. While humidity management is harder, and it's a lot of work. And the last 2 points are farmers who stress that out. But it's cold. It's annoying to work in the cold, and it's more on farmers' mind. You have to do more thing in a greenhouse where usually things are quite slow. You don't need to put as much energy, human energy. And then, so why heating? What you can get with heating? Well, it's better yields. It's more predictable. So you don't have holes in your harvest. Then it's less work, less stress. One thing I didn't mention yet is the irrigation line that you have to purge if it's below freezing point. That's something you can avoid to do, and well, one less task to think about. Then once again, farmers insisted on comfort, and it ends up with happier grower when it's heated. But what about the bottom line? Once again, I'm still referring to that study that's been made here, and they ended up selling for about 19,000 of spinach. And to get that, they used about, I think it was around 3,500 in heating, but I just increased it because price of fuel is always increasing, and they had insulation that people don't necessarily have. So I think 5,000 is decent rule of thumb for the whole winter, and cost them about 4,000 in labor. So in the end, they ended up with 10,000 to pay for the fixed costs. And usually fixed costs are kind of already have them anyway for the summer and shoulder season. But there's other fixed costs like snow plowing and things like that that can be really only for the winter. So you want to think about that as well. For most part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the heating line. So how can we reduce that line? How can we reduce the energy bill? And there's kind of 3 topics I'm going to talk about. So the first one is insulation. Second one is having the right climate. And the third one, which is maybe not relevant for everyone depending on the region, but it's about electrical heating. So insulation, many approach here. So how can we fix the leaks? The loss of energy through the ground, heat loss through air touching the cold plastic. And then the last one is a bit sneaky, is the radiation. And about like the radiation is about 35% of the energy loss, the heat loss, according to University of Massachusetts. So it's kind of a big deal, even though we're not really comfortable or familiar with it. And here I'm going to talk about payback a bit, and I had to take a number, so I took the one I see from people here in Quebec, which like for 4 season, people who produce year long, it's around 15,000 in propane that they spend. So I think it will probably seem high for a lot of people, and reason I think is well, first zone 5A, maybe colder than where you are. And the second one, which is probably more important, is that growers here invest a lot in the climate in the greenhouse to get because they get a better yield out of it. So I think people keep it warmer than what I've seen elsewhere, and humidity management is always a big chunk of the energy bill as well. So I think it's around 30% in general. And the payback also only going to include insulation material. I didn't count time, which is a bit harder to calculate than other material. All right, so fixing the leak, how can it impact you? I found some numbers about it, and for kind of small crack, like 1/8 of an inch, when it's around the door. So I saw a lot of doors that were a lot of leaks around, no weather stripping and stuff like that. So it's just that is $150, which is interesting. Oh, I put the dollars after the number. Sorry, French stuff. And then if you have a crack of 3 feet long, that's also a bit of money. But the most interesting one is around the perimeter of the greenhouse. So that can add up to $2,000 of energy per year, which is quite noticeable at the end. And places where you should look for those is for people who have a bit of plastic at the bottom of the greenhouse. In French, I think we call them skirts. I'm not sure if that's how people call it, but the plastic at the bottom of the greenhouse is often there's air going beneath it. So we don't want that, and an easy way to fix it is just to bury the plastic so there's no air coming through. So that's the first thing to check out. And the second one is when you have your roll-ups, just make sure there's no air going below it, and on the side you can wire lock the thing. So there you want to put it as tight as possible, and that could have a big impact on your the amount of energy you need. And those are quite easy fixes. So about 3-month payback, I put it approximately. Then you have the ground, the loss of energy through the ground, and the bottom part of the greenhouse where there's not that much light coming in anyway. And just the ground, I saw, I think it was University of Vermont was saying it's 15% of your heat that goes through there. So that's something to think about. And I think Harnois, I think it was them who said that 20-25%, you can save between 20 and 25% of the energy by insulating the bottom of the greenhouse, as I showed in the picture, and the ground, which is typically done at the same time with either insulation panel or door cutouts that a lot of people are using here in Quebec. And door cutouts are quite cheap and more insulating, so I think it's a really good option, but they're a bit harder to find. You cannot go to the hardware store and just ask for them. So I saw people looking for them on Craigslist and stuff like that, but that's a good option if you can put your hand on some. And both together, it results in about $3,000 in energy savings that you can get. The north wall, I'm not going to talk too much about this one, but depends on the orientation of the greenhouse. So if it's north-south, then the north wall would be an end wall. So you can just insulate it in a permanent manner. Otherwise, it would be a roll-up. So when it's a roll-up, you need to put something temporary if you really want to insulate it. So the payback is not as good, since it's only a few months a year instead of the whole year that you benefit from it. But still, it can be interesting. Oh, and there's also another thing I'm thinking about. I saw people, not that many, but they're using double plastic for the roll-up side, and they're inflating it. So I think that can be like a quite easy way of doing that you can benefit for the whole year. And if people think it's too much for the roll-up motor. I've seen that, but I saw people just making X's in the interior plastic so that when the roll-up is rolling, the air is just coming out, and that works quite well. All right, so now the sneaky one, radiation. For those who are not familiar with it, radiation is, how can I explain that? It's like when you're sitting next to a window in cold weather, when it's really cold outside. I think David, he said it was cold today. And I see light next to you. So maybe maybe you have a window nearby and you feel the cold through the window, even though the air in the house is warm. That feeling of cold, that's radiation. And the plants in the greenhouse feel the same thing, and the soil in the greenhouse feel the same thing. You feel the cold from outside, even though it's warm inside. And the irrigation line, the same thing. So if you don't want it to freeze, that's something to keep in mind as well. And how can you protect yourself from loss through radiation heat is using infrared treated plastic for your greenhouse. Or you can also use material like the double foil, I don't know how to call that, double bubble foil thing. Anyway, aluminum material that you can use to just reflect the energy, and also condensation, which is a tricky one. And I wanted to give an idea of how much energy is in the greenhouse that we're losing just by radiation. And for a soil that is at 5 degrees Celsius, it emits like constantly the same amount of energy that 2 propane heater, like 200,000 BTU heaters. So that's a lot of energy that are constantly going out of the greenhouse without, we cannot do much about it, but put some infrared protection. Like infrared treated plastic, if you're not familiar with it, it's quite common for greenhouse manufacturers, so you can find that quite easily. And it's only the inside layer you want to use that treatment on, not the outside one if you have 2 layers of plastic, because otherwise it also prevents light from the sun to come in, so it's double-edged sword. Now, condensation can help a lot to keep energy in the greenhouse, but you want it on the plastic. You don't want it on the ground nor on the leaves on the plants, because on the plants or on the soil, it creates a good environment for fungal problem to come in the greenhouse. So you really want it at the right place. And how you can control that? Well, it's just cold outside, so when the air is humid inside, it's going to condensate, and that's good. But you don't want it to drip on your plants. And there's anti-drip treatment on plastic that you can get. Usually it's at the same time in the infrared treatment. So you just make sure when you change your plastic, or if you're building a greenhouse, to ask for that, so that you're not going to have water dripping on your plant and causing diseases in the end. Now, maybe some of you have seen ideas of structure inside the greenhouse to put even more insulation. Here's a picture I've been sent a few weeks ago. It's here in Quebec. They just built kind of a greenhouse inside the greenhouse, and the goal there is to add an extra layer of plastic, and you can put it infrared treatment on that one as well, since you can just roll it up during the day. And it's really cool because you can automate that over row covers. It's less trouble, but you still have a problem, I believe, is that the structure is in the way when you work. And if you want to grow tomatoes or any high crops during warm season, then you have to disassemble it or just work through it. I don't know, but that's still a pain, and that's a lot of steel, so probably expensive as well. I believe we can go further with that idea and have a cheap version. That's an idea that hasn't been tested. I got a lot of interest when I did that presentation in French, so maybe we're gonna have more data about it. But the idea is to have kind of a low-cost thermal screen. So take the idea of a roll-up, but just put it horizontally just below the trusses of the greenhouse. And that can help a lot during the winter. I think it's about 25% of energy you can save, and maybe more with the radiation thing. But if you can find a way to put the trellising for tomatoes below the screen, you can then use it not all year long, but a big portion of the year. So you can save a lot of energy throughout the year with this idea. And then you can also insulate with one extra layer on the south wall of your greenhouse if it's a roll-up. And the idea is always like, why we're not just letting them there, is just that every layer of plastic is kind of taking out 10% of the light. And during the winter, since we don't have much, we want to keep it as much as possible, so we want to open it during the day. And yeah, those two things together, I think it's over 25%, if I remember correctly, of energy you can save with it. And you can automate it, so you don't have to think about it every day. And you can use the same motor as well as the roll-up sides that you don't need in the winter anyway. So no structure in the way. You can work in a comfortable climate. And it's still not tested. We need to figure out how to put the trellising. I've been working a bit on that, but when calculating it, it's a few tons of tomatoes we have to hold in the greenhouse, so still a challenge there. Anyway, if you're interested, just write me. I'll try to send you where we're at with the ideas there. Okay, so think about it. Insulation can save you a lot of energy. It can also save you on the heating system size. All in all the insulation techniques I've talked about, you can save probably 5,000 or more over a 15,000 energy bill. And that's typically 1 year payback for the whole thing, a bit more if you include labor and extra stuff. And depending where you are, I think there's people from a bit all over the place, but there's energy saving grants that can be available in your region. I think in the States, the Inflation Reduction Act can have something for you. Not sure, but it's worth checking out because you can save there if it's not too complicated, hopefully. I want to just say, adapt to your reality. I use $15,000 of propane as a typical energy bill. Oh, cool. And RCS has energy saving programs, so check that out. Yeah, so you can just use the ratio over 15,000 and adapt it to your energy cost. I put instructions if needed. When you have the slides, you can check it out. Yeah, so next section is about how can you control the climate wisely. Once again, it's a place where there's a lot to discover. I wanted to give you where we're at right now, so the best guidelines I can provide. So people are often asking questions, and it's kind of, I don't like to say it, but we don't know much about what's the optimal temperature, but I'm going to try to give you guidelines. And after that, talking about humidity. So the temperature in the greenhouse, first thing, kind of principle, heat wisely. You don't need to heat as much during the whole winter. And the beginning of the season of the more like your winter crops, you want to harden them. So slowly bring them closer to freezing temperature so they can develop in a way where they kind of adapt to the cold, and they're going to be less sensitive to frost if they're in contact with it. And the second principle is same as in the beginning: follow the light. Light is queen. And what it means is that there's few months during the year, the winter, like typically November, December, January, there's not much light there. So even if you heat the greenhouse a lot, there's not enough light for it to grow. It's probably just gonna counter grow because there's not enough light, and you're just activating the metabolism of the plant. So it's not worth it to heat then. But when let's say late January or February comes up, then you want to heat more because there's more light, and it's more worth it to do it. And so what would be the ideal temperature? Once again, I can just give guideline. If it was me, if I was starting out growing this year, what I would do is keeping the greenhouse always above freezing level. I don't want to deal with irrigation line cracking because it's freezing. I like the comfort of working above zero, and below zero plants stop growing anyway. So I want to keep that as much possible and aim for better yields there. So always above 0, but why is it, well, 0 in Celsius, above freezing level, and why not like 0 is because you're losing energy through radiation. And so if you keep it at 0, even if the air is not freezing, the irrigation line can still freeze and you can still have problems, and plants can still freeze as well. So that gives you a buffer a bit to avoid problems. And then, as I said, from late January, I would start increasing the temperature. Maybe I think people typically go up to 5 Celsius, but you can go a bit higher. And what I would recommend here is to take notes of what works, what doesn't work, and share. Like there were a lot of people interested. So if everybody take notes about what worked for them and share it together, I think we're gonna know more in next year about what we should aim for. And as a rule of thumb, it depends, varies from region to region, but still, it's about $5 per day for every degrees that you heat more than what's outside. So if you keep it at 5, or if you keep it at 6, it's about $5 that you have to pay more on top of the lower temperature. So every time you crank it up, just think, will I get more than $5 back from that extra degree that I'm heating? So that's the simplest I can make it here, with guidelines about what temperature to keep in the greenhouse, or what I would do if I were to start today. Now, talking about humidity. Looking at the time, okay, I'm not too bad. A few principles here. So the goal when you dehumidify is really to bring drier air in the greenhouse. Talking about it because a lot of people are talking about heating to dehumidify, and that doesn't work well. At least that's not the best way to do it, because when you heat, yes, you're going to have an impact on the short term. It's going to be a temporary impact, because when the temperature is going to go back down, it's just going to be more humid, because you're going to have plants evaporate more water. But it still helps if you cannot bring drier air because it's really humid outside. It can still help on diseases and on the plant growth in general, if I keep it simple. So heating to dehumidify is kind of a last resort thing, and it's more expensive, right? So that's why we want to take advantage of the sun as much as possible. But when we bring cold air in the greenhouse, we want the sun to heat it. We don't want to heat it with the heater. Of course, it's not possible during the night, but as much as possible, we want that. And the last principle here is aim for shorter and more frequent pulses of dehumidification. If you do it too long at one time, it's just going to tank the temperature, and then you're going to stress the plant and cause condensation that will bring problem. So if you can do it more often, more often, but shorter time, that would be better. But I understand that sometimes, depend if you do it manually, then it's kind of a pain, so maybe less doable, but as much as you can. So about humidity control, we want to prevent, there's kind of 3 techniques I think I put here to try to think about. It's kind of hard to apply, but I tried to make it as simple as possible, as actionable, but still it's not easy. So to prevent condensation, well, I said that condensation is bad for diseases. The most critical time for that is at sunrise in the morning, and the reason for that is when the sun comes out, and it just warms up the air in the greenhouse, but the soil is big thermal mass, so it's going to take more time to heat up. And when that difference between the air temperature and the soil temperature goes bigger, then it would just increase the risk of condensation on the soil. And I put an example there just to give an idea, but if the soil is lagging like 5 degrees Celsius or 10 Fahrenheit behind, condensation will happen at 75% of humidity instead of 100%. So it increases the risk a lot. And how you can prevent that is just try to keep the greenhouse temperature to not increase faster than 2 degrees per hour or 4 Fahrenheit per hour. And Once again, a bit hard to do if you do it manually. But if you have some kind of control system, there's a lot who can help with that concept of ramping up the temperature. Now, how to cut disease development cycle. Typically, how people think about this is you don't want to keep the condition in the greenhouse cold and humid for a too long time. If it's short time, doesn't matter. If it's a long time, then it gives time for disease to develop, and we don't want that. So I put kind of two strategies you can use, hopefully. The first one is the free mode. So when the sun is heating the greenhouse, and you don't need heaters to do it, then you can be a bit more aggressive on this. So what I would recommend is always stay above, like keep a buffer above the minimal temperature you want to keep in the greenhouse to not trigger the heaters. And you want to do pulses of bringing in cold air. And I would aim around 80% of humidity. So if you can put that on some kind of system that do it for you, that would be great. And you can just dehumidify, taking advantage of the sun for you. So that would be free. But if you cannot do that because it's the night, or because, I don't know, it's a crappy day outside, then you fall into the desperate mode. And the desperate mode here is when you have to use energy to heat the greenhouse. And here you want to do it just to cut the disease development cycle. So every X hour, you want to make sure that humidity goes down to an appropriate level, so that it will kind of just stop disease development. And I put the next here because we don't know yet what's the good, like how much hours we can spend in bad condition before problem happens. And in the summer we know more, but in the winter, since it's colder, everything is slower, so we don't know how much time we have before problem arises. And I heard things between 10 hours and 48 hours. I would just, if I were you, if I was doing it, I would just start with a number and take notes on what I observed. Do I have problem? If not, I would try to crank that number up, so I would use less propane. If I see problems, I would just bring it down to try to find what's the minimal amount of energy I have to spend on that. And once I find that, I would write to me so that I know it and I can share it with everyone. And the last thing to think about, to dehumidify, once again, a bit hard to do by hand, but if you can do it, is to start the night dry. So a bit before sunset, I'd say 3 hours before sunset, put the free mode more aggressive. So we want to lower the humidity. Instead of aiming for 80, we can aim for 40. So it would take more time for humidity to build up during the night and cause problem. So we can save on humidity control during the night. And if all those measures work well, that can have an impact on irrigation. So if you're used to just irrigate blindly, maybe if you try that out, keep in mind that it might affect the irrigation need of your plants. All right, so that's a lot of details, a lot of things, and it's kind of hard to implement. We've been working on a few prototypes to try to get all those ideas together so that farmers don't have to worry about it. We're not done with that, just prototypes, but if it's something that can help you, please let me know so we know where to put our resources to help you guys. Okay, electrical heating, not gonna be long on that one because, well, it's not relevant for everyone, but in some places it can get interesting, especially if you insulated the greenhouse properly. It get interested cost-wise and also, well, for the planet. There's some grid that are use renewable energy, then it's definitely good. If it's not using renewable energy, maybe not as good, but the first step to change that is to put energy on the grid. And I've seen a lot of projects working to clean the grid, and maybe hopefully breakthroughs will come this way. Anyway, is this profitable? I put here a table of, depending on the cost of propane, what's the break-even cost for electricity. So if propane is 70 cents per liter or $2.7 per gallon, then anything below 12 cents per kilowatt hours would be a good price, and that could be interesting to think about electricity there. I know, well, here in Quebec, we're really lucky. Price of electricity is really low. I think Manitoba in Canada is good as well as the other ones. And in the States, really depends where you are. I saw that New England, well, tough luck, it's really not good. Electricity is really high, but there's other states that seems to have prices that are not quite far from that, and fuel prices increase all the time. So maybe that can be interesting, especially if you have grants that allow that. Maybe in RCS that David you were talking about earlier, I'm not sure. But here in Quebec, once again, we're really lucky. There's other provinces in Canada, I know they have measures as well. I'm not quite sure about the States. There's many ways to use electricity. I don't want to talk too much about this, but here are a simple heater that you can find in home hardware and places like that. It doesn't. If you use minimally heated greenhouses with good insulation, you don't need that much. So it's not that expensive in terms of capital expenditure, in terms of installation costs. And there's other ideas that I've heard recently that people are using tankless water heater to just heat water and make it flow around, like in irrigation line, not just irrigate, but just make it flow in irrigation line around the plants. And that would be the radiation of the heated water that will heat the plants. And that can be a good idea if you have structures above your plants, since you don't want to heat the whole greenhouse, you just want to heat inside the structures. That can be a thing to think about. And I definitely saw a lot of grants with heat pumps. I didn't put in here, but heat pumps can be really interesting in terms of energy efficiency, but they're harder to set up in a greenhouse. Worked a lot in there, and well, it's not as simple, let's say. Okay, so done with the electricity part. Now, the last section of the presentation would be how to maximize heated space. That's another topic in itself, and that deserve a presentation only for that. So I just put a few tips because I think it's something interesting. If it's the first season you're doing it, then there's more information about that on the internet, and but I still wanted to put a few tips here. The first one is the calendar. You want to don't start from scratch. Try to use a calendar that has been from an established winter grower. So someone who's already growing in the winter, who's already been facing problems like the days to maturity that can double, triple, and more because there's not as much light. The temperature is not as high as during the spring, summer. And there's a lot of kind of trap there. So if you start with someone who's already been doing it, that will save you a lot of trouble, and you can always adapt there. If you don't know anybody that does it, maybe people here in the chat, maybe, or otherwise there's that book from Jean-Martin Fortier and Catherine Sylvestre. It's only in French right now, but they plan to release it, I think, this year in English. And there's calendar in there from which you can start. And there's also Pam Darling that has been very generous of sharing a lot of things on SlideShare. Did a lot of our observation with different varieties and different observation that you can learn from. So I would definitely recommend that out. If you plan to grow next winter and it's the first year, just one thing that Catherine was telling me is that people come to her in September to ask help to grow for the winter season coming up, and she says it's already too late. Like she says she should really start planning it in April. So don't start too late. And the last point is really take notes, because the days to maturity can vary a lot depending on when you're planting it. Like 1 week can have a big difference, and in general, there's still a lot to kind of simplify here. And that's one of the work I've been doing with Catherine, trying to cross-reference the data we had on the harvest data that they had at the FUT farm and the light data that we collected here with Orisha. And the goal is to build a calculator that will kind of give you the transplant date that you should do from the crop and the harvest date you want to have. So it's kind of a way to adapt days to maturity to your area. Right now, it's really specific to FQT farm, but if that's, once again, that's something that can help you, just write me your interest, and we'll see if we can just make it public and hopefully customize it with your GPS coordinates so that you can have a better idea and can kind of simplify the whole planning thing, so that really every space, every bed that you heat in the greenhouse can get you as much value as possible. Okay, cool. So I'm still in time. Before wrapping up, I have a small favor to ask. I'll send an email after the webinar. It would really mean a lot if you could just reply with what you thought of the presentation, the ideas were presented, and if you had other topics that you would like to learn from, that will help a lot, because your feedback is really our best planning tool to see where we should put our energy to make a difference, to help. Okay, so we talked about the location of the greenhouse. Light is important. Light and the wind is important. Then shrinking the energy bill, insulation can play a big role in there. Then the climate that you want to have, every degrees that you heat more will cost $5 a day, give an idea. And electrical heating, is that for you? I'll let you decide, but that for the future, that can be more and more possible, I believe. And the last one is maximizing the impact of heat. So how can you put an extra cut in your spinach, or how you can squeeze an extra harvest in there so that you can get more out of your greenhouse? That's short. I talk about it a little bit, but there's more you can find in the resources I gave you. So if you have questions on the topic, I'm happy to answer that the best of my knowledge. And I wanted to say, do not hesitate to call us. We're here to help. It's free. We finance our help through automation solution. But like if we don't have the answers, we help you get them, and that's our way to learn and to stay connected with farmers. So if you have questions now, my pleasure to ask. Otherwise, you can always contact us later. So thank you.